Hi there, this is Maximilian, and we're talking about Sunday's Sagittarius full moon, which happens on May 31st on 9, almost 10 degrees of Gemini Sagittarius. Sagittarius full moons are usually, and also on this year, with quite a few caveats, moments of where and how we become conscious. The full moon is illuminating and reflecting something back to us of where and how our semi-conscious or unconscious emotional material relating to the moon and our habitual emotional patterns that create our reality are being reflected back to us in a way that illuminates where and how and what we believe about ourselves, life, the world around us, and where and how, because of the illumination and the clarity that it can bring of becoming conscious of these more or sub or semi-conscious emotional belief patterns that we've carried, we can broaden our horizons and broaden our worldview, find a deeper sense of meaning, and that often coincides with the deeper sense of feeling alive, feeling joy, feeling a sense of purpose or direction or clarity of where we are going and what we're moving towards too. Keeping in mind that every Sagittarius full moon is always the reflecting back, the full moon, of what is going on with the sun right now in Gemini. And I want to look into that, but I also want to look a bit into three significant transits that activated around the time of the last new moon 2 weeks ago that are now kind of culminating or coming into stronger focus, and which I feel will still come into stronger focus over the next 2, 3, 4 weeks, so over the next moon cycles and what happens in June. Yeah, but before we get into that, don't forget to like and subscribe. That would be so nice and kind of you. Doesn't cost a thing. And with that, let's go into the chart. So as you can see, we've got the full moon here, 9 degrees Sag, 9 degrees Gemini, right? There's another kind of hidden thing about the full moon, which is connected to the fixed stars of Aldebaran and Antares, and also two fixed stars here, Regulus, the heart of the lion, and Formalhaut of the southern fishes, southern Pisces. I'll get into that a bit deeper mystical layer also still. But before we untangle what and how this full moon talks about in a deeper sense this time, this year, for us in this moment in time, in the greater context of what is actually unfolding on planet Earth, I kind of want to backtrack for a little while and just first of all look at what happened around the time of the last new moon, right? That was 16th of May. It was, of course, a new moon in Taurus here, late Taurus degrees, together with Mercury. Interesting, Mercury being the ruler of Gemini and thus of this Gemini season. But that's not the main key thing I want to draw our attention to. The first thing I want to draw our attention to is that this new moon in Taurus, which is about planting a seed for where and how we can find a deeper sense of embodiment in material reality, and in that way a blossoming, a fullness, an abundance, a safety, a peace, but also a pleasure and a joy in finding our rootedness in that, which means our rootedness in our body, our rootedness in feeling safe, physically safe. I'll get to the concept of safety also in a moment as well for this full moon. But also where and how we can plant deep new seeds of what and how new life can spring forth, right? The fact that it was together with Mercury, implying also that something is up with the mind and our mental nature. Getting into that as well in a second. But the key thing that I find so valuable and interesting and worthwhile to really sit with for a second, to really consider the greater cycles that we find ourselves in this really effing intense year, is that just as that new moon happened, with all of its desires and goals and ambitions that I just named, we had Mars together with Chiron. Mars is, of course, the ruler of Aries. He was in Aries in his own home sign, so naturally strong. There's anger, there's fire, there's drive, there's impulsiveness, there's maybe a certain rashness or impatience as well. But Mars together with Chiron implying that where and how we apply our will, our assertiveness, our drive, our ability to act in alignment with what we maybe Mercury think about or Moon and Sun really deeply need and want, right? What's a deep seed that we've planted here 2 weeks ago that wants to bring new life, new sense of stability and embodiment into us? And then how we translate that into our actions in the physical reality, Mars, having met Chiron here, initiating a new 2-year-long cycle. Mars takes roughly 2 years, so in roughly 2 years he'll meet Chiron again, by that time in Taurus. And Mars, Chiron implying there's a pain, there's a wound, there's a sense of brokenness in regards to asserting ourselves, in regards to having the courage to fight for what we want, going after what we desire, right? Having the courage to just do it. And that came into picture, moving on, that came into the picture at the beginning of this week, here, May 25th, this was Monday, when Mars was already in Taurus and had its first opening square to Pluto in Aquarius. They were together in winter, also around the time, if I recall correctly, when the big ice protests in the States really started erupting, right? That belongs together. Pluto, the collective unconscious, in Aquarius, we the people, the freedom to be ourselves, the freedom to be who we are and want to be, and Mars, action, fire, drive, intensity. So now, beginning of this week, we had this opening square that puts all of these things into perspective of like, how can we truly be free and authentic in our self-expression and the freedom to just be who we are and want to be? There's this deep desire that was seated there and which is really active with Pluto and Aquarius on one level. But Mars and Taurus, the square aspect also implying here is friction, probably was a moment of breakthrough or breaking apart. Because where and how we have a tendency to build up the resistance to change, which is a very kind of Taurus energy, because we want and need the comfort as well. We need the comfort to feel safe. But of course, Pluto and Aquarius saying to that kind of Taurus energy within all of our psyches, no matter if we've got placements there or not, saying like evolve, change, be radically much more authentic. And if something is not aligned with that, then it must go, right? So this moment already proved like, whoa, there's a lot of friction and tension between we want to preserve a sense of safety and stability and comfort. Taurus is a sign most resistant to change. But on the other hand, there's also Pluto and Aquarius that says like, no, be free or don't be at all, right? So a certain intensity and maybe points of rupture that erupted over last week or last weekend. And it moved forward, moving away our focus from Mars to Venus over these last couple of days, Thursday, Friday, Venus squaring Saturn, right? And we've got the kind of same dynamic, just different colors, because Venus here is in Cancer and Saturn, again, in Aries. And Cancer also needs safety so much. Whereas Taurus is more about the physical survival and our physical survival in our physical body and whatever that entails, shelter, food, money, clothes, right? These kinds of very strong Taurus symbols. Venus in Cancer is much more about emotional safety, emotional connection, emotional interbeing that creates coherence and creates holding ourselves, feeling held by others, by people, by lovers, by families, by communities. And again, Aries, a bit like Aquarius, is also about like, no, do something novel, break out, break free, just do it, right? So with Venus, that of course relates a bit more to relationships and our sense of self-worth, but how we find a sense of safety in relationships and an alignment of our inner sense of worth reflected outwardly. So Venus square Saturn also shows like a test, a friction, a mirror, a challenge of, is this still enduring? Can this still hold? Does this still provide a structure, Saturn, which actually gives me emotional safety or makes me feel emotionally nourished? So we had these two rough transits just this week coming out of this actually very strong Taurus new moon 2 weeks ago that move us into the territory of this full moon here, 9 degrees of Gemini to Sagittarius. So everything I said before about Sagittarius opening us up to more expansion and greater vision and deeper meaning, right? Aligned with our intuition. That's a key word here, needing to trust and listen to our intuition. Normally wants to bring us into big new adventures or big journeys or really opens us up, right? Yet at the same time, we had both of these transits that speak about the resistance of parts of ourselves to the necessary change, which maybe also feels a bit more Pluto, Saturn, a bit more social, a bit more in the collective field. The intensity is definitely picking up. People are losing it on all sides and directions, right? All kinds of delusions and confusions, which of course also speaks so much about this Gemini and Sagittarius energy. Because as we moved into Gemini season, we had also last couple of days the Sun together with Uranus for the very first time that the Sun met Uranus in the sign of Gemini. Speaking about this faster speed, the greater influx, Uranus, of mental stimulation. And as if the last couple of years or whatever have not been that already, but this, at least astrologically, speaks to this kind of frequency, this kind of experience for us will just pick up immensely, but also creating a lot of restlessness, anxiety, overwhelm, dissociation, even more dissociation from our bodies, right? Gemini is so much about curiously engaging with another, not with ChatGPT or Google Gemini, right? But with a true human other. But of course, because so many of us daily also engage with these AI, in quotation mark, large language models and algorithms that just mimic human speech, human understanding, human reflection, the reflecting side of Gemini. There's two twins, there's two mirrors. In order to find out more who you are, you need the opposite, right? But this kind of also conditions our synapses, our neural network, our mind, if we constantly engage with these kinds of models, not just to do a cheap version of a Google search, but to actually talk and question things and get advice. It just leads to so much more dissociation from the true human realm that Gemini really is about, right? And it also just leads to more and more confusion that is very present and very palpable in the field, leading to this full moon, Sagittarius, that talks about meaning. And I've spoken more about this on my Instagram, but the world is in a huge crisis of meaning. There's a complete lack, and not just a lack, but a dissolving, a disillusionment in regards to our old meaning making structures, societally, personally, globally, and in our little communities, right? That relates so much more to Neptune being now in early Aries and this huge new Neptune cycle having begun. But this huge collective sense of disillusionment also speaks about where and how nothing makes sense anymore, in the sense of nothing has any valuable meaning. There is no inherent meaning. Everything is just chatter. Everything is just noise. Everything is Gemini energy amplified to the max, but very seldomly a feeling of like that true sense of higher vision or deeper vision being seen. Everybody getting lost in their own little echo chambers in which the same kind of like Gemini talk is just ping-ponging back with each other, but very few this very deeper broadening of our worldview and perspective. Together with the different kind of Sagittarius energy, which I really also want to pull in for all of you, is hope. Hope and trust and faith. And I don't just mean that in a personal, one-on-one, in your own life, in your own connection to your heart, to spirit, to your path. I also mean that for sure, but also in a much broader sense, because it really feels like so many people are completely losing hope because of this loss of meaning, also loss of a deeper insight. So the moon in Sagittarius showing us that we need to tune into our own deep intuition, which is a silent small voice. It can easily get overshadowed by all this endless Gemini facts and chatter and trivia and another perspective, another viewpoint, another reel, another algorithm, right? But no, in order to find what is meaningful to us, what is really bringing us a sense of deep, deep, deep connection to divinity, to spirit, to something higher and beyond, we need to tune into our own intuition. And this is where I think this full moon gets really interesting and has a very different kind of tone than normal Sagittarius full moons, is the fact that Jupiter, being the ruler of this full moon, is still in Cancer. I've spoken about this before, but Jupiter in Cancer feels very much to me like our longing to belong, our longing for home, our longing for safety, our longing for emotional coherence. The deepest quest of the Cancer archetype is, of course, to find out that we are always home, we always belong, we are children of Gaia, of nature, of life, of the Creator, if you want to call it that. And we're always home no matter where we are. And that our true home is there, and that if we can tune into that kind of frequency, that there is an invisible layer of a sense of support and nourishment present, right? But it also shows us that in order to be able to even discern and listen and have clarity of what our intuition really is, really talks about, that Sag energy, that Sag full moon, that really can open up much greater visions of who we are and what we're here for and what our life is for and what's the meaning of all of this and how we can untangle our old unconscious emotional belief systems that keep us small, that keep us entrapped, that keep us feeling stuck. We need to have that emotional coherence, Cancer, within our own selves first. As long as we try to bypass that, and this is also why I pulled up these like different aspects that were happening in the last 2 weeks, because we've got these very strong energies in the sky right now that both talk about expansion, movement, forward, fast, change, right? Awakening, but also rupturing. But there's also this, yeah, Mars is still in Taurus, Venus and Jupiter are now in Cancer, and very soon, just a day or two after the full moon, Mercury here will also move into Cancer, and Mercury will stay in Cancer for a long time until beginning of August because it'll go retrograde in Cancer. So we've got like these two very opposing sides in the sky in our own psychic life, very active right now, of change and awakening, but also the intensity of that and the fear of that, but then also the desire to find comfort and stability and rootedness and home and slowness and arriving, right? Cancer and Taurus. And they stand a bit in a friction to each other. So Jupiter in Cancer speaks so much about where and how we need to have emotional coherence, emotional belonging to ourselves, emotional safety to feel our own emotional processes in order to first find out what our intuition is, because otherwise we get lost in the endless echo chambers of the interwebs or whatever of Gemini, right? We get confused, we get overwhelmed, we get scared, we get anxious, we get restless, and we buy into all of the doom and gloom, right? And again, I'm not saying that this year is not going to be intense or the next years are not going to be intense, but that as soon as we give our power away to fear and doom and gloom and the anxiety and the restlessness, we're just reperpetuating that frequency in our direct circumstances, in our relationships with our friends, with our lovers, with our community, right? We're not feeding an energy of rootedness, of home, of peace, of trust, of hope, of belonging. At the same time, Jupiter being the ruler of this full moon in Cancer, of course, also shows where and how these moon and Cancer archetype, semi-conscious, unconscious, emotional, habitual patterns, that's a moon, contribute and are the fundament to where and how they build and create our beliefs and our unconscious belief systems, which with this full moon really want to be dissolved in a certain way, or at least be illuminated and seen clearly, so that then with enough Cancer, grace, and softness and sweetness to ourselves, we can dissolve them and change these patterns, so that more adventure, more expansion, more opportunities and deeper sense of meaning and purpose can really be accessed. If we try to bypass that, we're just emotionally dissociating ourselves again, right? Like, oh no, I'm too tired of this slowness in this process and the heaviness of the feeling process within me and the parts of me that cling to the comfort that some part of my mind rationally knows just keeps me stuck. So I want to like brush it aside, right? And that's when we can bulldoze. That's that more Saturn in Aries or that Pluto in Aquarius frequency. We can bulldoze over them, but thus emotionally dissociate and also become disconnected and dissociated from our intuitive capacities. Yeah. The other thing that I also just briefly mentioned, one more thing is, of course, within the next 2 weeks before this moon cycle is over, we'll have Venus and Jupiter meeting on 9 and 10th of June here at 25 degrees, 26 degrees of Cancer, which traditionally is often seen as like the most positive aspect of the year, the two benefics coming together. And it just deepens that this Cancer quality, creating home, creating roots, creating emotional safety, belonging to ourselves, belonging to the place that we feel we are in right now. Yes, Sagittarius shows us it's all the journeys, all the trip, man. The journey is the destination. All of this life is impermanence. You're always gonna move, sure. But you can also arrive in the present moment, here and now, always, and find a sense of home in that. The other thing that I feel this talks about as well is just a more kind of yin approach to this kind of very young energy, right? Gemini and Sagittarius is fire and air. It's young. There's like movement, energy moving outward, right? But being ruled by this Jupiter and Cancer, and also Venus moving there, and we're about to enter this very long Mercury in Cancer emotional inner process. Oh my God. Um, that a more yin kind of approach to get yang kind of results is actually the way to go here. The more we can relax and open to actually seeing the patterns, seeing the fractals, seeing the synchronicities that are always present, that we can't see if we get lost in the factual one-sidedness and polarity or duality of Gemini, right? If we truly want to open up to the mystery, we gotta like surrender and soften a bit. And that's also where these four stars come in that I mentioned earlier, right? Um, the full moon, I can't fully show this because I didn't activate the one just now here, but bear with me. So this full moon is exactly on the axis of Aldebaran and Antares. You see on the outer wheel here, I've got the 15 Bohemian stars, 15 magical big fixed stars. They're one of the brightest in the sky. They're just missing, curiously, one that doesn't belong to the Bohemian stars, but one that is also called one of the Watcher stars. And this full moon, together with the south and north node of the moon, being still in Virgo and Pisces, here the south node in Virgo, here the north node in Pisces, also being ruled by Jupiter, also being ruled the south node by Mercury, just like Gemini is. Also talking about where and how discernment is necessary, but where and how we must also learn to have faith and trust and surrender to a greater mystery, to the unknowing, right? That actually this is the path forward, and too much being stuck in our mind is not losing our discernment, though, which we see way too much right now. But anyhow, these 4 points, and the full moon also being in a square to them, the full moon is exactly on the fixed star Antares, the heart of the scorpion, which talks so much about tenacity and penetration and intensity, but also over exaggeration, overinflating, becoming obsessive, which obsessive not necessarily, but the driving a point home too much can be Sagittarius energy as well, of course, right? Trying to overinflate something or becoming a zealous, dogmatic kind of preacher, like you gotta like see it this way and not that way, right? Our fear of curiously being just open to hearing another's perspective and seeing that always lead to truth ultimately, and we don't need to convince anybody of what we see and believe, right? Argue with a fool and you become one. At the same time, the sun is exactly on the fixed star Aldebaran, which is the bull's eye. It's a red big giant, which is the eye of the bull, the eye of Taurus. Constellations and the zodiac signs are not the same thing. And yes, they're overlapping, but yes, it's also a whole nother story, and it would be way longer video to truly explain that in a satisfactory way. But at the same time, the North Node and South Node are slowly also approaching these other two cardinal stars of Regulus, the heart of the lion, and here on 4 degrees of Pisces is Formalhaut of the southern fish. It's not of the constellation Pisces, but the southern fish. It's a different constellation. But these four stars are being seen since ages and ages and ages as the four stars of the four cardinal directions of the cardinal cross, sometimes also of the four guardian angels, the four archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, Uriel. And to see that this full moon is really activating that cross, yes, the North and South Node will still hang out here for the next 2 months before they move into Aquarius and Leo by August. But that just deepens and pulls in that this moon really talks about these world-shifting events that we're in the midst of, but also Aldebaran of where and how we must align with a deep sense of clarity, right? Aldebaran is so much about valor, but also integrity and tenacity, certain stubbornness, just like Taurus, but also standing up for what's right, standing up for what's just. There's so much the energy of Aldebaran. And Antares can also promise prominence, promise incredible gifts and success if we don't fall into the pitfall of like obsessive, controlling, too much tenacity, too much intensity, right? With Regulus being the heart of the lion, right? And here also this royal protector energy, while North Node is so close to Formalhaut. Regulus is just into Virgo since a couple of years, but Formalhaut is very much here where the North Node is right now on 4 degrees of Pisces. Just deepening where and how we must surrender to myth, to mystery, to the universal flow of life, to dream and imagination, because the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. And I, for one, firmly believe it's coming. We might still have some intense years, but also another story. Holding on to that vision, though, while at the same time not falling into the shadow of this kind of archetype of getting lost in the collective unconscious, getting lost in delusion and projection and wishful thinking, which we also see way too many people right now, right? Losing that sense of Virgo discernment and clarity of mind because the loss of emotional coherence within that actually tunes in and allows true intuition paired with discernment to really help navigate this crazy forest of facts and informations and viewpoints that we're being bombarded with right now. So that's just a few thoughts on this Sagittarius full moon. I hope that was illuminating in some way or sense. If there's any prompts I can give you, would be to really deeply sit with and pay attention to maybe what also happens in the dream space, in that liminal space when you're just waking up, just falling asleep. What kind of emotional stories are revealing themselves to you, and what do they tell you about your unconscious belief systems? Where and how do those keep you stuck on small, not thriving, but also not authentic, or maybe also disconnected from things that really feel deeply meaningful and thus giving you a sense of vitality and aliveness, right? But at the same time, also seeing where and how these unconscious belief systems and the emotional patterns that they co-created with you were there to support you, were there to protect you, were there to guide you in the past. To that shell, that cancer crab shell, was also protection. Yes, you can maybe let go of big parts of that right now, but also there, this process can't be rushed, it can't be hushed, it can't be bulldozed, right? But to also honor and see and give thanks to the unconscious emotional patterns and the subsequent belief systems that this created in your life, right? So to transmute them. And I think this like emotional, semi-conscious, dreamscape, meditative Jupiter, Cancer, Pisces energy is actually the key and lock right now that can really open up this energy. Because remember, there's a lot of forward momentum, but there's also a lot of things in all of us that is resisting that and is afraid of that. And we can't disown the one and try to claim the other. Then we get lost again in the Gemini duality and think that life is just black or white. It's just this or that, right? Holding open a space of and consciousness, not just either or, but this and this. The paradox can cancel themselves out, but you can hold both at the same time, right? So you're like, oh, both can be true. Yeah, they're paradoxical. Normally one would negate the other, but holding both at the same time. That's deeper parts of Gemini Sagittarius mystery. Anyhow, thank you so much for listening. Yeah, I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.